A product that MCF is really well known for is our range of marker floats. The Thunderbird we've been making for probably 15, nearly 20 years, I would think. We had a special foam system developed to actually inject into a tool so that we can spray the colour into a mould, then the foam is poured in and moulded into the actual texture of the paint. It gives a perfect non-scratch finish. Like on most floats, you're not getting this chipped and breakages. The whole float is a solid system. We've gone back now to a metal eye. For production reasons, we went away from this metal eye for a year or two, but listening to our customers over the last year or so, people have been having problems. I mean, people were actually taking the old style float and tying directly to a plastic ring. This proved to be a problem, especially with brake, because people were pulling it tight and cutting through it, instead of just using a little metal link, which alleviated the problem altogether. Now we've done away with that, and we've gone back to our old system of casting in an actual metal eye. There's a plastic sleeve there that goes right up inside of the float, which is actually moulded in, so strength is paramount again. I mean, I know people with these floats that have had them for 10, 12 years. They look a bit beaten up by now, but they're still using them. That just goes to show the actual strength of these floats. Within the range, I mean, probably the large Thunderbird and the small Thunderbird are our best sellers. Really buoyant, very robust. The right people can cast them 100 yards. I certainly do struggle a bit to get them that sort of range, and that is why I developed our marker float. Nice and slim, flight on the top. The flights are interchangeable, and you can get them with, or you can get spare flights, yellow and black, and of course the orange. So this float probably good up to 80, 90 yards, a good all-round float, and the same with this. If you're fishing closer in, pretty weedy waters, where the weed's not too thick, so the float will still come up with the veins on. These two floats are stalwarts really. A lot of people use them still. The lighthouse float, again, as it suggests the name, made to actually stand up in the water. Good buoyancy down under the water. The right weight on, that will sit up in the water there like that. Again, good visibility. Good all-round float again. The Stealth, as it says, small, used mainly in smaller waters, but some guys I know like this because it will cast an awful long way, 120 yards. Personally, at my age, I can't see the bloody thing at 120 yards. But for younger chaps, it really does show out, and it really does cast well. Then we come through to the weed beater, again designed purely for fishing in really heavy weed conditions. No flights on it to hold it up in the water as it comes up through, pushing its way through weed, and again good buoyancy. To go along with our marker floats, we've got a little system there that just, if there's any weed or debris on the bottom, it just lifts the line up off the bottom there. The lead weight's on the bottom, and I'll just run through how we assemble that. Always use a decent shock leader on your line. The ring is just threaded through the ceramic ring. Ceramic ring's got a brass case around it so they don't shatter. We've been producing these for many years now. There's a rubber bead that comes in the pack. That's just pushed onto the line. Acts as a buffer. And the float is then tied to the bottom ring. Again, wet the line, pull it tight, make sure it's tight, tighten down. There's a lot of pressure on there when you're trying to cast a float, 100, 120 yards sometimes. You need that knot tightened down so it's got good strength. You don't want any sudden jerks because you'll be cracking it off. And that all slides down. We've got our own mace lead. It's got the little bobbles on there, so when you're fishing, when you're trying to find out what different bottoms are, silt or gravel, you can feel it by pulling that lead across the bottom. You can just feel the bobbles and bumps and jumps as it comes across the bottom. The lead is then attached to the clip. On the end of the feature finding setup, and that's your setup. A little tip that I would certainly use, and the way that I certainly use a marker float, is to, once you've cast out, all I really use a marker float for is deviations in bottom. It's very difficult to actually feel what's going on with a marker lead attached to a really buoyant float. So what I do, I just basically use the marker to actually find variation in depth. Once I've found that, like looking for a bar or a bump or a plateau, once I've found that variation in depth, I'll use a second marker rod, because sometimes you'll cast it out, reel it in to try and find out how big the bar is and plumb around, and you lose the spot, you lose that mark. So the best way is to just leave that one there as soon as you found a spot, and then use a second rod to cast either side of it, plumb it again, past it, in front of it, so you can actually build up a picture of what you've got in that area. You can actually use that second marker rod to plumb around, pinpoint the spot where you want to actually cast to, leave that marker rod, get that one out the way, then cast your lead to it and use the lead on your line to actually feel the bottom. That will give you a much better feel for what you're trying to achieve, especially if there's silt. It's very difficult to find good fishable spots in very silty lakes. So again, that's when that is a key. Put one of these on your normal rod and then use that to actually feel the bottom with, rather than just trying to lead around and use a marker float, because the float takes away all that feeling. Even with braid. Again, braid is not something I like to use. Not very fish friendly, not very wildlife friendly. People crack it off all the time, leaving miles and miles of horrible braid, thin braid that cuts and tears not only fish but other bird life, wildlife. So what I'd use is probably a 10-pound good mono, cheapish one. You know, there's some very good monofilaments on the market that you can cast just as far with a good shock leader on. So again, I'm inclined to steer away from braids, plus the fact they're blooming expensive. But that's the setup basically.